All right, here it is. It's 2 after 2. We've got more joiners. Hello, Susan. Hello, April. I don't know if I said hi to John Wilson. We have one of our many Hollies, her iPhone anyway. Christine, hello. Hey, Kurt, Ingrid, Angie, MJ. We already spoke today, but glad you all came here. So, what are we talking about today? We had a good discussion. Can everybody still hear me? Nod, blink your eyes. Okay. Um, we had a good discussion last time we got together about sellers' property disclosures and home inspections and kind of how they relate and what our liabilities are and how we can limit those liabilities and how we can protect our clients. Um, there's more to it than that. And this is kind of an extension of our last training with the seller property disclosure. And it leads into another training that's coming up totally separate from me that Sarah Cox with Titan's going to be doing on October 19th from 1 to 2:30. Mark your calendars, invite yourself, consider yourself invited. And that I call, what the hell am I looking at? And that has to do with deeds and title commitments. And all of that relates to what are we actually selling? And that's what we're talking about today. What are you selling? While inspections and property disclosures are valuable for many of the finer details that we deal with on a home, there's many other details that can't be seen or known without a bit of knowledge and some questions and research into the property. And we have to communicate these items to the right transaction partners. The property disclosure, in so many occasions, is kind of a breadcrumb in the trail leading to a larger issue. So when we're looking at that seller's property disclosure, we may need to follow that trail to get to what we really need to know. You guys know what I'm talking about? Sometimes there's a mention of an easement. Sometimes there's an unexplained repair. Sometimes there's an unanswered category. But what I want to talk mostly about today is the land itself and title issues and things that might not become readily apparent just from looking at the MLS sheet. So I want you guys to think of yourself as the hub of the transaction. We are the conductors to make sure that all the members of the orchestra are working together off the same sheet of music. And we need to make sure that that sheet of music is legible. It's not missing any notes, and it all goes together like an orchestra. If it was easy reading off the same sheet of music, they wouldn't need a conductor at all. And that's what we're here for, is to make sure that everybody knows what's going on and can play together. Our sheet of music is the agreement of sale. And the people that we're trying to get to play together are the buyer, the seller, the title company, the lender, the other agent. And that takes communication. And some of that communication is pretty well scripted out. Some of it needs, we have to improvise from time to time. As with most things, we can look to our standard forms for guidance or prompts as to where we need to go with this, right? Your best bet to make sure that we have a fully workable contract is to make sure that all the blanks are filled in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, how do you find out what you're actually selling? And this will all make more sense as we go through it. Like, well, I know what I'm selling. I'm selling 123 West Main Street, right? Has anyone had a situation where we found out after the fact that we weren't selling exactly what we thought we were, or we were selling more than we thought we were, or we were selling less than we thought we were? I would love some interaction here. Any stories that we can build off of? I think that this will start to sound more familiar as we get there, but let me hit a share screen real quick and talk about exactly what, or show you exactly what I'm talking about. And the reason I'm talking about this is I've had two occurrences over the past 2 weeks. One where there was an easement that was not clearly communicated to the buyer and they decided to back out 4 days before closing. Another situation was a buyer found out that two parcels in a transaction, only one of them changed title. So they thought they were buying 3.48 acres, found out they only had the title to 2 acres of that. The other portion of that was on a separate lot that didn't get included in the agreement of sale, so title didn't transfer to that. Can you imagine the storm that might come out of that and what the repercussions were? So let me get down to my screen share.
Question, Justin, though, is the easement portion and things of that nature, is that more of a title responsibility while checking title and deeds in, or is it more us?
Well, it's, you know, let me figure out my screen share here. Okay, that's a little bit of everybody. It does come down to, well, and it depends on the type of the easement, right? If it's a utility easement, every one of us probably has some sort of easement brushing up against our property. If you live out in the country and you have a phone line or a power line running down alongside of the road, then that's a utility easement. Some of us might have a
I
drainage.
can't think of the chainsaw, round,
What?
sharpening supplies.
Can we mute that?
Oh.
Thanks. What we're talking about here was there was a 50-foot easement. Okay, there was a 50-foot easement running up the one side of the property to allow access to the former owner, who's a farmer or whatever, to get past the front lot to the back. And it was noted in the seller's property disclosure, any easements. Yep, 50 feet along southern border. And that was all that was said. Buyer's agent missed it, didn't impress upon the buyer the importance of that. And the buyer, who was very into privacy, said when he found out, got the title report back, the title commitment said, absolutely, I'm not buying this property. And we could have headed that off at the pass. We're all fighting over this now. When it was supposed to close last Friday, we got an extension for 2 weeks to work through this. But had the buyer known about that up front, we could have had this easement vacated, which we're planning to do in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the transaction, instead of extending the closing and getting everyone's blood pressure up 2 weeks after this property was supposed to close. So did the seller disclose it? Yes. Did the buyer sign off on it? Yes. Are we still going to fight about it? Absolutely. Could it still ruin the deal? Yeah, because the seller wants $680,000. They don't want to fight for their share of a $15,000 earnest money deposit. So no matter whose responsibility it is, it's our responsibility. Back to my sharing. Hang on. Everybody see my dot loop page? What I'm talking about specifically for this easement one was are you aware of it said, are you aware of any easements? And in one of these, it said, yes, 50-foot easement along this, along a particular property line. So those are things that oh, here we are. You know, any one of these right here that could be answered yes. If it's not clearly explained, we need to ask more questions. Or if it is clearly explained, we still need to ask more questions. I want to go more to this part and show you on the standard agreement of sale things that we can use to protect ourselves. If we're the buyer or if we're the seller and we have multiple parcels, we need to fill this out. If there's more than one tax ID, make sure that both tax IDs are on here. And if you are listing the property, make sure that those are advertised in the agent remarks and or public remarks of your MLS to make sure that everyone is aware that multiple properties are going to be conveyed. This is our sheet music. Somebody else who's playing in the band who's very important, that's the mortgage lender and the title company, are working off of this. They don't have access to the MLS, so they don't know what your comments say, and they don't know what's being offered. They are not pulling the tax map. They are not pulling your associated documents. You and the other agent need to make sure that this is correct, because this document is the one that they're all working off of. And we don't pay enough attention sometimes to the information that is on page 1 of our agreement, because that is the cover sheet that follows us through the whole way through this transaction. If there's any question as to the tax IDs, we can go more in depth by offering information regarding the deed book and page right here to be crystal clear about what's conveying. And if there's a subdivision to be happening, there's other information that we can use as well. I'll show you a document that you probably didn't know existed. And that is the property description addendum for vacant land. This property description addendum can be used with slight modifications for non-vacant land if there was a situation as to subdivision of additional property. Okay, so how do we find out what we're selling?
Pull the deed.
We fill in the blanks, we pull the deed, that's good. We have the seller fill out the property disclosure completely. We have the seller to a lesser degree, fill out the items to convey. Now, if I had the choice between having to buy an additional parcel of land which didn't convey correctly or a refrigerator, it's going to be a refrigerator every day of the week. So I think that these situations are my video not working?
It's been off and on there, Justin.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. There we go. I think that these property considerations are, less likely to occur, but more important than some of the finer details that we come up against every day. but it's good practice to make sure that you don't have any blanks in your listing contract or your agreement of sale that you don't know should be blank. And I always believe in putting an NA or not applicable just to check that, nothing was overlooked. Okay. That's good practice. Fill out your items to convey. Fill out your vacant land addendum if you're selling vacant land to talk about what rights are conveyed. And what happens more often with vacant land than any other property is there's going to be a subdivision that's yet to be completed or something along those lines. And then, of course, your standard agreement of sale to make sure that everyone's playing the same tune the whole way through. How else do we find out what we're selling? Train yourself to ask more questions. Never stop asking questions. There's an attitude held by many in this industry, not just us, but many brokerages, many agents. I don't want to know, right? I know enough. That's getting a little scary. I don't want to know. This doesn't protect your seller, your buyer, or you from any exposure. The reason that we get paid the big bucks sometimes is that it's your responsibility to know what can be known about that property to convey that information along.
So Justin, I have a question for you then.
Please.
I actually have a situation right now where there's two parcels and we'll just call one 58 and one is 59. And I can see on the deed that they wrote at the top those parcel numbers, but the two tracks are included in the deed. And when I look at the GIS map, there's only 58. So I called the township today and they basically we're looking at the measurements, we're comparing it with the deed. Most likely at some point in time, it was absorbed or consolidated. So do I need to make reference anywhere of number 59 if it's potentially been absorbed or consolidated?
I would provide that information in the associated documents. Show that GIS parcel, provide that deed, and make reference to all that together so that somebody can look at that and understand what's going on, the same as you did.
So, but with the contract, does the listing contract, is it okay to just have 58 and the sales agreement just have 58 and not
I would
reference
use the tax ID number.
Well,
If the tax ID number encompasses both lots 58 and 59, then you're covered.
Okay, because right now it's just only known as 58.
Okay, then use that tax ID, which identifies both. And you can make a note in your associated documents or the agent remarks that this lot is what is known now as 58 was once lots 58 and 59 of the original subdivision plan.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So train yourself to ask those questions just like April did. Hey, this doesn't jive. Know what to be looking for. We should be looking for easements on the property. Power easements. We should be looking for drainage easements. We should be looking for access easements because we don't know what that buyer's plan for the property is. And wouldn't we rather know up front if this deal's going to blow up than at the end? Is this an estate? That's a question you should be asking yourself. Not only what am I selling, who is selling the property, and do they have the right to sell the property? Ask yourself that question. Anytime you hear an estate, it's time to ask another follow-up question. Marital status. Is the seller single? Are they married? Are they divorced? Are they divorced now after having purchased it single following a failed marriage? Why does that matter?
They
It
may
may.
not, they may not have the right to sell it.
If they are in the process of a divorce after having purchased the property while single, they may not have the right to sell that property without proceeds going to their former beloved. What's the zoning consideration? I know April's in one right now. I think it's the one we just talked about, which is
It is.
commercial zoning for a residential house. If we have zoning issues, that warrants a further question on your behalf. If it is not primarily residential district, ask more questions. You should always be asking yourself, is this a flood zone? And do I know where to go to find out if it is? And are there multiple parcels? So these are all the words that I want you to listen for and start asking yourself more questions. Easements, estates, powers of attorney, marital status, or a change in marital status, flood zones, zoning, use, multiple parcels. Those are all things that trigger questions for you to become a little bit more inquisitive when looking through. Anytime one of your clients fills out a form, you should look at what they have put on that form and be prepared to question them on the answers that they put in there. Like if they give you a seller's property disclosure that says easement on it, and you don't have a piece of paper depicting that easement, whether that is a deed with a verbal description or a subdivision plan with a drawing of that easement, you should be asking yourself, how do I get that so I can more clearly understand what I'm selling? So more under how do I find out what I'm selling? You have to know where to look or who to call for these answers. You all remember those words that should trigger further questions? I'm going to email this out to you or make it available to you. Easements, flood zone, multiple parcels, zoning. Where are some of the places that we can look for more information on these topics? This is a test to see who's awake, but because you should all have a suggestion one way or another here. Kurt, what was that?
Township records,
Township records. What are we talking about there?
zoning in particular. Because we ran into one that we had a buyer looking at. It was kind of and I had never seen this before, where it was previously a residential / commercial, both. But if it gets sold, it had to be converted over to completely commercial.
There we go. So where do we go to look for that information? I'm just going to keep on pushing you until we get to all the answers, Kurt. Where do you look for that zoning information, Kurt?
Well, that one and the property that I'm selling currently, I found all the information on the township's website.
Okay, you found it on the township's website. Sometimes there's a lot of information there that is written in jargon.
Legalese.
It's written by zoning officers for zoning officers as authorized by the municipality's planning code of the state of Pennsylvania. Who do you call to help interpret that information for you?
I haven't found one that I didn't understand yet, but I would assume an attorney.
Well, I'm going to direct you to the local zoning authority. That's in most cases going to be your township. In some smaller townships with lesser populations, you might find a multi-township authority that's handling that. That's very frequent up in some of our northern markets where there's going to be several townships bundled together. In one case in particular, I can think there's one township who does that for the neighboring township. And I think that you find your results are best if you investigate this yourself, come to a little bit of an understanding, then call them and say, am I tracking this right? Because there may be addendums or updates to the ordinance that you're not seeing because you're not spending every day here. So calling them to explain to you or verify your information is the best way. Then you convey that information to your buyer or seller and have them give them the opportunity to verify that for themselves. So, township zoning map and ordinance, that's on my list. Yes. What's another way to verify the quantum of land? I have a threefold process to make sure I'm selling the right piece of ground. Any ideas what one of those three approaches might be?
I like to use the GIS mapping or courthouse records.
Bingo. That's two of them. So county GIS is going to give you the aerial map. Every one of our counties should have a GIS department that shows us an aerial tax map that's interactive that you can click on it. That's not it. See, here I have two for Cumberland County. One is the property mapper, one is fine zoning. Everybody should have something similar to this in their county that shows them what we're looking at. Does anyone not have access or has anyone not seen something like this? I can't see you, so unmute yourself. So you can put in an address. And it will show the property that you're looking at. So this is my first step in most cases to verify what I'm selling. I do this on every listing and every purchase to make sure that I understand what I'm selling. And this is telling me that this is 0.12 acres. Everybody know how to use this tool? Does everybody have this tool available to them as a taxpayer? You should. And if you don't, I'll point you in the right direction. I use that as the first check. What's another way to double check that the tax map is right? Go into the MLS, check the public records. There should be a previous record of a sale of that property, or you can pull up the tax card from the courthouse through lots of different varieties. Courthouse Online is one to double check that 0.12 acres is correct. What am I double checking that 0.12 against? Ultimately, the deed. I want to make sure that the deed, the description in the deed matches what I'm seeing with my own eyes as that 0.12 acres. Because the legal description of that deed is going to tell me how much land, where it is, and it should make sense here. If I'm getting something that's vastly different, it's going to be a little bit different. Holly, I'm seeing a comment from you here. Could you unmute and clarify a little bit? What does constructive notice, or does constructive notice matter in this situation? Holly, you can unmute later and finish that question for me. Okay. I'm going to check the county GIS. The reason I started checking the county GIS versus the deed and pulling the deed is some guy called me up one day and said, "Hey, do you want to sell my farm?" I said, "Yeah, I want to sell your farm." And I got on to the county GIS. I put in his name. It showed me his farm. I clicked on the farm and saw that it was 150 acres. I worked up a market analysis on that basis. I called him up and he said, "You're crazy. It's worth twice that." He went with the other guy. I come to find out later, had I pulled the deed, I would have seen that the property was not only in Cumberland County, but also crossed the county line into Franklin County, and I was only seeing half the picture. So it was over 200 and some acres rather than the 150 I was looking at. So that changed my whole process. Double check that you know what the quantity of land is by pulling that aerial photo and pulling the deed so that you have the whole picture. Further, let me share another thing with you. If I want to make sure that I'm selling the right thing, I can see that Justin Hovetter owns this piece of ground. I want to see if, nope, that's not owned by Justin. 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 Okay. I can isolate that there's probably not going to be any other multiple parcels show up in this sale. This happens most often with vacant and farmland, where we might think we're talking about this one, but instead we're talking about both of these. So that's what we want to know, and that's what we want to isolate. Another great way to look, most of your larger counties are going to give you the opportunity for a tool, something like this. Where you can put in the property and it's going to do a zoning district search and tell you what the zoning district is for that property. Medium density residential. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I know a lot of us have different programs. But most counties should have something like this, especially your larger counties. Okay. Previous MLS records are a good one. Does anyone here know where to find out if you have a property that's in the flood zone? I'd love to hear some suggestions.
Maps on Bright.
Maps on Bright. If you have the Bright MLS, go to the 360 agent report, and that map is going to give you a pretty good representation of whether or not you're in the flood zone. Any other suggestions?
Go directly to the FEMA website.
Brilliant. Does everyone know how to find the FEMA website? This is the source of everybody's information. This is where it's all coming from. Let's go check that out quick. Has anyone seen this before? If you haven't, it's a great tool. It requires a little bit of knowledge. and sometimes some patience if traffic's heavy. But it's going to show you, here is my property that I'm looking at, happens to be the one I live in. And here are all the flood zones involved in the property, you know, in the area. Many of you are more involved in flood zones than I am. I'm just going to give you the quick rundown. The brown area, 500-year flood zone, not something we're generally concerned with. This tealish area, that is your flood zone, and that's going to be an issue for insurance purposes. And then this striped area is the floodway. So this may get flooded here, the teal stuff. This striped area, there's actually going to be water flow. And typically, if there's not a property there, you're not going to be able to build a property there because that's a regulatory floodway. Okay. Just Google FEMA.gov and it will take you right there. And you'll want to know sometimes how's this conversation go with our sellers? Do you pay flood insurance? You know, are you in the flood zone? If they've been living in that property for 30 years and paid off their mortgage, or if they've lived there for 50 years, they may not even really know that they're in a flood zone. And there are weird, sneaky flood zones that pop up all over the place, where a property isn't paying flood insurance. So this FEMA tool is a great one. Only takes you a couple minutes to verify the information, and it can save you a lot of heartache down the road.
Hey, Justin.
Yeah, Kurt.
I just wanted to bring up one thing there. I noticed down here in the southern part of the county, York County, that a lot of times if you use the street address, you could be off by quite a bit on that. So, and I notice on FEMA that they allow you to put in latitude and longitude. If you go to Google Maps and put it in, you'll get the latitude and longitude that you can go back and use on FEMA.
And what I do most often is actually zoom into the point where I can see the property and make sure that I can see exactly where it's at. But yeah, good point.
Yeah, because I had one that was 15 minutes away when I put the street address in.
Well, and
it happens.
A lot of times they're shooting these, you know, they're shooting these from satellite. So the standard deviation on that's 5 or 10 feet. And in a flood zone, 5 or 10 feet can be a deal breaker. Do the research. I always recommend get the answer you want or the answer you're looking for and pursue that to the next level. So if I can see that this is the house I'm looking for in the GIS, click all the houses around it just to verify. Go to the next level of information to verify that you've got the whole picture, then pull back and make sure that you've got what you're looking for. Invest in the right tools. If you don't have Landex or access to a deed pulling service, you know, I recommend it. It's a small investment and it's easier than driving to the courthouse. I love that the Flex MLSs require the deeds. I think a deed should be involved in every transaction, listing or purchasing, because it makes sure that we all know what we're talking about. And it's crazy to me that Bright doesn't require it. I think it's a good idea. But if you're in an MLS who doesn't require it, I recommend investigate that for yourself. Invest in Landex. It's free to get the program, but you have to put money in the bank to get those deeds in the future. I throw $100 in there and it'll last me over a year. It cost me, 75 cents to pull a deed. And then you'll have it whenever you need to investigate. Hello. you'll have it available to you when you need to investigate that right of way, that easement, or that subdivision. And you'll be proficient at using Landex. So I think you should invest in the right tools or subscriptions to know how to learn it and do it yourself so that you can do it. If it's over your head and you're not comfortable with it, know who to call. And please call me, because I generally know who to call and how to make a run at getting this information so that you can protect yourself and your clients. Also, you should know that if you are calling somebody for answers, maybe you're calling the township to find out what the requirements are for a particular thing. The more specific your question is, the more specific your answer will be. So if you inadvertently misstate your question, your answer is going to be off a little bit too. So sometimes it's helpful to ask, am I understanding this correctly? And you should always wrap up those conversations with, is there anything else I'm not seeing, or is there anything else I should know? Ask the question of those professionals and let them talk. So what's the best way to communicate what we're selling? Make sure that your contracts, your addendums are completed and completed correctly. Like I said, if your client is writing something in a disclosure, make sure that you read that disclosure. It's a good practice to review all of your sellers' property disclosures, buyers and sellers, and ask yourself all the questions. If there's something that's checked no or checked yes that requires further explanation, make sure you understand that explanation and quiz them on it. Associated documents are a big one for me. I think that is a great way to cover your rear end by, if we do have an easement, if we do have multiple parcels, if we do have some wacky scenario, make sure that you find the most complete version of documentation you can that clearly states what you're doing and get it into those associated documents. And whenever it goes under contract, require that the buyer sign that off. Also, I think that what we're trying to do here is make sure that when deals go together, they stay together and there's a true meeting of the minds. We may have lived up to the letter of the law by saying that there was a easement on a property. But if the buyer doesn't understand that the neighboring farmer can drive a combine harvester back there 3 times a day, then they may not understand actually what they're buying. And they're going to come back and they're going to be upset at some point. And whether they're right or wrong, we may have to defend that. And it's going to take a lot of time away from you doing what you want to do, which is going out and selling more properties. And it detracts, Heather, we heard about this yesterday, from your client's experience. So if we can offer the most complete experience for our clients, free of bumps in the road, that's going to get us more referrals, more business, make sure that our business is high speed and low drag, and that we don't have to go back and revisit these situations and do work that doesn't get us paid. So how do you protect yourself? Make sure that all documents and communications are initialed by all parties. So whenever I put together a listing, I put in the aerial photo, I put in the deed, I put any easement descriptions or whatever, and I send that all over with my listing paperwork for the seller to initial. And that's one more chance for them to say, hey, this isn't correct. And if I missed it and they missed it and it winds up being wrong, at least I'm not the only one who missed it. and they attested that this was honest and correct, and it's no longer my fault, right? Communicate by email or dot loop every opportunity you can. Why? Anybody?
So there's a record of it.
There's a record. Dot loop is the best, in my opinion, because there's not only a record that it was sent, but there was a record of when it was received, and when it was viewed. You know, if I want to see if somebody signed something, I go in and I check the dot loop, and I can see that they opened it, but they didn't sign it right away. That tells me they may have a question on it, and it's time for me to follow up. Refer to a professional if you don't understand. And I do this all the time. Know your limitations and be ready to punt, and don't be ashamed of it. So don't try to do too much and get yourself in trouble because you're trying to save time, because in the end, it could cost you a lot more time than what you're willing to expend on that. Call your broker, call your manager, call your friend, bounce those ideas off them, but make sure that you guys understand what you're doing. I'm working on a checklist to make available to guide you to put into your listing and buyer loops so that you can ask questions, kind of a key to some of these things. But I want you to look at the agreement of sale to be that checklist overall, right? Here's what I'm talking about. Sorry, screwed up. If we look at our seller's property disclosure, it says tax ID or IDs. That's an invitation to look at more stuff, right? Anytime we have these things, you know, it's inviting us to ask more questions of what's going on, right? And those are important. This cover sheet can help you to understand more clearly what you're selling and to who, and make sure that everyone has the right, you know, the authority to do that. Don't forget, try and hit that deeds and commitments training that's going to be happening on the 19th with Sarah. You should know what you're looking at. I think that this is your responsibility. Whenever I email my notes out to you, along with the recording of this training, I'm going to include a article by Jim Goldsmith at PAR talking about what agents need to know about deeds. Did this trigger any thoughts or memories of stories or situations that any of you had where you went under contract and it didn't wind up being exactly what you thought you were selling or buying? Well, good for you guys. I'm proud of you.
Dumb luck.
Dumb luck. All right. Well,
Hey, quick question. Is the 19th going to be recorded? Because I have to be at the Placemakers thing in Bloomsburg that day.
to be determined. Depends on whether Sarah has recording anxiety. Terry, are we recording that one?
Yes, we will make certain that's recorded.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All
I
right.
do have a question though, Justin.
Lay it on me.
I have a listing that's coming up and they have a driveway and she said that the neighbors share it, but there's nothing in writing.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yep. That's something that requires further elaboration, right? What is the, what's the arrangement there? Is that driveway Is it on the boundary line and it's just double wide and they share it? Or is it on one property or the other?
It's on their property.
It's on their
And
property.
yeah, and then like the people that share it, they live to the back of their property. So there's another way to come in, but they choose to use their driveway.
Oh, that's nice. They may or may not have a recorded easement, and I would look to the benefiting properties deed. I would pull both deeds and see if there's any mention of that anywhere. That could be a good call to Titan. They'd be happy to pull those deeds and investigate that for you and with you.
I did, I mean, I know the seller, when I talked to her yesterday, she said that it would, even the previous owner said it was all verbal. And I was like, well, that might work now, but it's not going to work maybe later.
Yeah, I would think that, that's something that you need to ask questions on. Good. How's the neighbor going to react if the new guy says, no, I'm building a shed there? Or no, I don't want them crossing my land, which is their right. How's that going to react? And, that's something to be discussed with your seller. And does the seller want to, make sure that that neighbor has ongoing access to their property in the form of an easement? Because they can record that now if that's important to them. Otherwise, that may be a risk.
Then just sell the neighbor's property too.
Yep, sell them both.
Sell them all.
As you're
And then-
talking about maintenance, you're talking about driveway maintenance and snow shoveling and other expenses that are involved that they're taking benefit of also.
And that
Yeah.
could be the new owner's point of view is, I'm doing all this for free. I want some maintenance here. So those are questions that's a conversation that needs to be had, and I'm happy to give you some talking points on that. I think I got something else here in the chat regarding estate sales. If I'm the buyer's agent, is it my responsibility to confirm that the seller has the authority to sell the property? That's an easy conversation, and the answer is yes. Only in that title is going to require a copy of the short certificate and perhaps the death certificate. Short certificate is a certificate that's issued by the Register of Wills that gives the executor or administrator of the estate the authority to sign on behalf of the estate. We've had situations in the past where we represented the buyer and the property had been listed by a power of attorney. So seller was sick. Power of attorney listed the property. Seller died, but the executor was someone other than the power of attorney. We had it sold in between the time the power of attorney was authorized and before the executor was appointed. So the power of attorney didn't actually have the right to sign that property, and our contract was void. So I always, first week after we get that under contract, make sure that you get this, as the buyer, you get this over to title, so the title company can ask for that short certificate and everything. And that's not a bad conversation to ask as the buyer's agent, to ask the seller's agent, do you guys have a short cert? Is the estate open? Are we good to go? Because it could cause me to delay. What's that?
You put them back on life support.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's what she's gonna do with me, you know that.
I know. Keep on collecting checks. Any other situations where you know, it was more than it appeared right up front?
It's just frustrating as the buying agent and you ask the buyer to review the seller's disclosure and there's items that are marked yes, and then there's no explanation. So it's just nice if it's all complete.
It is. And if we don't quiz the seller on that, you know, we can't force them to answer, but if we don't direct our buyers' attention to those, then we we haven't done our job, and there's a possibility that we could be held responsible. Because we're the guides through this.
The worst mess I ever had was vacant land that was landlocked. And none of the properties around it would allow anything permanent. He had a walk-in. It was a wild piece of land where he just went and hung out and hunted and whatever. He wanted to sell it, and nobody wanted to give the right away. And that was a mess.
Yeah, that's a lot of lawsuits right there.
Yeah, it's the legal length of time to solve something like that can be prodigious. And frankly, we never did.
So we're getting around here. It's about time for me to start doing sermons on the agreement of sale again. Would everybody be open to starting a rundown of the agreement of sale here starting next month?
You bet.
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds good. Then I'll go ahead and plan on that, and I'll start working through the agreement of sale, allowing for plenty of discussion and questions and scenarios on that. Because there's some finer details in there that we should know about. Okay. Well, thank you all. That's
you.
what I have for today. If you don't have any other questions or comments, we'll adjourn. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.
See you, Justin.
Bye now.